I was 27 when this whole mess started, and I thought I had my life more or less figured out. My name's Caleb, and at the time I was living in a small but cozy apartment downtown, working a job that I actually liked, rare enough in itself, and dating a woman I thought I could see a future with. Her name was Rachel. She was smart, charming, the kind of person who could walk into any room and have everyone's attention without even trying. I loved that about her, or at least I thought I did. Things started off great between us, but over the past few months, something had shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Late-night texts she wouldn't let me see, girls' nights that suddenly included guys she swore were just friends, and a general air of defensiveness anytime I asked where she'd been. I wasn't jealous by nature, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. The moment it all really clicked was on a random Thursday night. She'd come home late, smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine, and instead of offering any explanation, she laughed when I asked who she was with. "You worry too much, Caleb," she said, kicking off her shoes like she didn't have a care in the world. "If you can't handle me partying with my ex, maybe we should break up." I just stood there, staring at her, stunned into silence. My chest felt tight, not from anger, at least not yet, but from that deep kind of disappointment that knocks the air out of you. I'd bent over backwards to make this relationship work, supported her through her job changes, even helped her pay off part of her student debt when she was in a rough patch. And here she was, looking me in the eye like it was no big deal to spend her weekends with the guy she used to date. I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Good idea," I said quietly, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of surprise on her face. She clearly hadn't expected me to call her bluff. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing, not just about Rachel, but about everything. My job, my future, the quiet feeling that I'd been holding myself back. There had been an open promotion at work for months now, one that would require me to relocate across the country. I'd been hesitating because Rachel said she wasn't ready to leave her family, her friends, her whole life here. I'd said no because I thought we had a future together. But by sunrise, my decision was made. The next day, I walked into my boss's office and accepted the promotion on the spot. My boss was thrilled. Apparently, they'd been hoping I'd take it. I signed the paperwork, set a move date for 2 weeks out, and by the end of the day, I was packing boxes in my apartment while Rachel sent me passive-aggressive texts about how dramatic I was being. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out. But underneath the numbness, there was a growing sense of freedom. I wasn't just leaving Rachel behind. I was leaving behind the version of myself that kept settling for less than I deserved. A few days later, Rachel finally seemed to realize I wasn't bluffing. She texted me, "Can we talk?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I waited until I was standing in my brand new apartment, miles away from everything that had been tying me down. The place was empty except for a single box in my suitcase, but I'd never felt lighter. I snapped a photo of the apartment keys on the counter, the city skyline visible through the window, and sent it to her with a simple message. "Talk about what?" Her reply came almost instantly, a flood of texts I didn't bother to read right away. And that's when everything with my family started to spiral. See, Rachel wasn't just my girlfriend. She was close with my sister, and apparently, she'd been filling my family's ears with her side of the story. When I called my mom to tell her about the move, she didn't congratulate me. Instead, she asked if I was really leaving just because Rachel went out with a few friends. It hit me like a slap. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. Suddenly, I was the bad guy in my own family, the one who was running away instead of working things out. My dad made a comment about how I was being immature, and my sister accused me of abandoning everyone. I tried to explain, calmly at first, that this was about more than just one night out, that I'd been feeling disrespected for months. But no one seemed to want to hear my side. And that's when I realized something ugly. Maybe it wasn't just Rachel who had been treating me like my feelings didn't matter. Maybe my whole family had gotten a little too comfortable with me being the one who kept everything together, who stayed close by, who never rocked the boat. It was a sobering thought, and for the first time, I started to wonder if this move might be about more than just a job. It might be my first real shot at living life on my own terms. But the more I pulled away, the more pressure they put on me. Calls, texts, even my sister showing up unannounced one night, demanding I sit down and just talk to Rachel before I made such a big mistake. That was the night I snapped. I told her I wasn't making a mistake. I was finally making a choice. And I wasn't going to let anyone guilt me out of it. But as I watched her storm out of my apartment, I had a sinking feeling this was only the beginning. My family had never handled being told no very well, and something told me they weren't done trying to drag me back into the mess I'd just escaped. And I was right. When my sister stormed out that night, I thought maybe she just needed time to cool off. Maybe she'd call me in a day or two with an apology, or at least be willing to listen. That was wishful thinking. The very next morning, my phone lit up with a barrage of texts, not from her, but from my mom. "Your sister is very upset," Mom wrote. "You owe her an apology." I just stared at the screen for a moment, dumbfounded. I owed her an apology? For what? For saying no to being pressured back into a relationship I didn't want? For refusing to sit in the same room as a woman who treated my boundaries like they were optional? I took a deep breath and typed back, "Mom, I'm not apologizing. I'm moving. My decision is final." Her reply came just a minute later. "This isn't just about you, Caleb. We are a family. You can't just run away whenever things get hard." Something about that word, run, hit me hard. They were acting like I was a child throwing a tantrum, not an adult making a considered choice about his own life. I set the phone down, feeling that old familiar heaviness creep back into my chest. The truth is, I had always been the easy kid. My brother, Mason, was the golden child, the loud, charming one who could do no wrong. Growing up, Mason was the one who got into trouble, came home past curfew, flunked classes, but he always managed to charm his way out of real consequences. Meanwhile, I did everything right. Good grades, part-time jobs, saved money, stayed out of trouble. And yet, somehow, I was always the one told to compromise for the sake of keeping the peace. This was just another repeat of that same old pattern. Mason had already texted me once since the breakup with a simple, "Bro, just chill. She's hot. Don't be dumb." That was his idea of brotherly advice. Stay with a girl who openly disrespects you because she's attractive. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I got. My move wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about finally stepping out of the shadow of my family's expectations. But they weren't going to let me go without a fight. That weekend, I went to drop off some of my old stuff at my parents' garage, things I didn't want to bring across the country, but didn't want to throw away either. When I pulled into the driveway, my stomach sank. Rachel's car was parked out front. I almost turned around right then, but I told myself maybe she was just here to pick up her own things. Maybe this would be a quick, quiet exchange. The moment I walked into the house, I knew I was wrong. My entire family was sitting in the living room. Mom, Dad, Mason, and Rachel, like some kind of intervention. "Caleb," my mom said, her voice tight but oddly rehearsed, "we all think you're making a huge mistake." I looked at her, then at Rachel, who had the audacity to look offended, like I was the one who had betrayed her. "I didn't come here to have a family meeting," I said carefully. "I came to drop off some boxes." My dad stood up, crossing his arms. "You can't just throw away a good relationship over something so small." That's when something in me finally snapped. "Small?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think me being lied to for months is small? You think my girlfriend spending every weekend with her ex is small? You think me being laughed at when I try to talk about it is small?" The room went quiet for a moment, and for a brief second, I thought maybe they'd finally understood. But then Mason laughed. "Man, you're so dramatic," he said, shaking his head. "It's not like she cheated. You just can't handle a little competition." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. It was like every childhood memory of being brushed aside, every time Mason got away with something while I was told to be the bigger person, came flooding back all at once. I put the boxes down on the floor and said, "I'm done. I'm not discussing this anymore." But as I turned to leave, Rachel spoke up for the first time. "You're just proving everyone right, Caleb. You always run when things get hard. You'll never have a real relationship if you can't learn to forgive." That one stung. Not because I thought she was right, but because I could see my parents nodding along, silently agreeing with her. I left without another word, got into my car, and just sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I should have felt relieved to finally say my piece, but instead I felt hollow. I'd never been the kind of person to yell, to walk out on my family, but that's exactly what I'd just done. That night, I didn't pack a single box. I just sat in my apartment and stared at the wall, wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe I was overreacting. But then my phone buzzed again. It was Mason, and this time he wasn't even pretending to be helpful. You know mom's crying right now because of you? She says she doesn't even know who you are anymore. Hope you're happy. Something about that text snapped me out of my spiral. I realized they weren't trying to understand me. They were trying to manipulate me. They wanted me to feel guilty enough to undo the decision I'd made, to keep playing my old role as the peacemaker. And for the first time, I decided I wasn't going to play it. Over the next few days, I doubled down on my preparations for the move. I called the movers, signed my new lease, and started clearing out my apartment. But the pushback only got worse. My mom started calling every night, leaving voicemails about how family should come first. Mason posted a photo of him, Rachel, and my parents having dinner together with the caption, "Family night," heart emoji. It felt like they were all teaming up just to show me how replaceable I was. By the end of the week, I was done feeling guilty. In fact, I was starting to feel something new, determination. If they wanted me to be the villain for choosing myself for once, fine. I'd play the part. And then came the phone call that changed everything. The one that pushed me from quietly leaving to actively planning how I was going to reclaim my life on my own terms. It was from my dad. And what he said made me realize just how far they were willing to go to keep me under control. When my dad called that Friday evening, I almost didn't answer. I'd been ignoring most of their calls that week, but something about seeing Dad on the screen made me pause. Part of me still wanted to believe he'd finally hear me out, that he'd say something like, "Son, I get it. Do what's best for you." So I swiped to answer. "Caleb," he said immediately, skipping the pleasantries. "We need to talk. Face to face." My stomach sank. "About what?" "About this nonsense with Rachel," he said. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we think you're making a huge mistake throwing away a good thing." I rubbed my forehead, already feeling the tension building. "Dad, I told you, this isn't up for debate. I'm not staying in a relationship that doesn't respect me." He sighed, long and heavy, the way he always did when he thought I was being difficult. "Caleb, you're not thinking clearly. You've always been too emotional. That's why we did what we did." I froze. "What do you mean, what you did?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Rachel called us crying the night you broke things off. She didn't know what to do. So we told her to come stay here for a while until you came to your senses." It took me a second to process what he was saying. "You what?" "She needed support, Caleb," he said, like this was the most obvious thing in the world. "She's family too." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. "She's not family," I said quietly. "She was my girlfriend." "Was? And you invited her to live with you?" "For now," Dad said. "We just don't want you to make a rash decision. If you could just sit down with her, talk like adults." "Like adults?" I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. "Dad," she humiliated me. She laughed in my face and told me I should be fine with her partying with her ex every weekend. "And your solution is to let her move in with you." "She's going through a lot," he said, completely unfazed by my anger. "She needs stability right now. We all do. And you blowing up your life like this isn't helping anyone." That was it. That was the moment the last thread of trust one had snapped. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking now, not from fear but from pure rage, "you chose her over me. You didn't even bother to ask for my side of the story before you gave my girlfriend, my ex, a room in your house. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" There was silence on the line, and then he said, "You're overreacting." I hung up. For a long time, I just sat there on my couch, phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. My mind was buzzing, but at the same time, everything felt strangely quiet, like a switch had flipped. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It hadn't been for a while, but now it was clear. My own parents had sided with the person who hurt me the most, without hesitation, without even bothering to ask me how I felt. They'd crossed a line, one I couldn't pretend away. The next day, I drove to my parents' house. I didn't text ahead, didn't call. I just showed up, parked in the driveway, and walked up to the front door. I could see Rachel's car parked at the curb, and for a moment, I almost turned back. But I didn't. My mom answered the door, and her face lit up, like she thought this meant I was coming around. "Caleb," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "We're so glad you came." I didn't smile. "Where's Dad?" "In the kitchen," she said, hesitating. "And Rachel's here too. We were just having lunch." Of course she was. I walked into the kitchen, and there they were, Dad at the head of the table, Mason scrolling on his phone, and Rachel sitting comfortably like she'd been there for weeks. When she saw me, her face shifted into what I can only describe as a smug smile. "Caleb," she said softly, like she was the injured party here, "I'm so glad you came. We really need to talk." I ignored her and looked at my dad. "I want my stuff," I said flatly. "Anything I left here, I'm taking it today." Dad frowned. "Caleb, sit down. You're being childish. We just want to help you work through this." I turned to leave, but then I heard Mason snicker under his breath. "Guess Mom was right," he muttered. "You really can't handle a woman with a past." That was the final straw. I spun back around, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "This isn't about her past, Mason. This is about respect. Something none of you seem to understand." Rachel started to say something, but I cut her off. "And you," I said, my voice low, "I don't ever want to see you again. Not here, not at my parents' house, not anywhere. You lost that right the night you told me I should be okay with you running back to your ex." The room went silent. No one moved. I grabbed the boxes of my things from the garage, loaded them into my car, and drove off without saying another word. By the time I got back to my apartment, my phone was blowing up with missed calls and texts. Mom begging me to please come back so we can talk this out. Dad accusing me of tearing this family apart. Mason sending me memes mocking me for being dramatic. But the message that hit the hardest was from Rachel. "You're not just losing me, Caleb. You're losing your family. Think about that before it's too late." I sat there staring at the screen for a long time, feeling this strange mix of heartbreak and clarity. They were trying to corner me, to make me choose between myself and them. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to choose myself, no matter what it cost me. But if they thought I was just going to quietly disappear while they played happy family with my ex, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Because that night, as I packed another box, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they'd thrown away, and I was going to do it in a way they'd never forget. That night was the first time I really felt what it meant to be alone. I sat on the floor of my half-empty apartment, surrounded by open boxes, and listened to the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence you get on a quiet morning. It was heavy, pressing down on me, making the space feel smaller with every minute that passed. Up until that point, I had always assumed that no matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, my family would at least be in my corner. Sure, we had our disagreements. Sure, Mason got most of the praise growing up while I got told to be the bigger person. But at the end of the day, I believed they cared about me, about my happiness. But that night, staring at the walls that felt closer than ever, I realized they didn't care about what was best for me. They cared about what was easiest for them, what kept their version of family harmony intact. And that version apparently included my ex-girlfriend having a seat at their table and me being expected to swallow my pride so no one had to feel uncomfortable. The weight of that hit me all at once. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but no tears came. Instead, I felt this dull ache in my chest, like someone had scooped out everything inside and left nothing but a hollow echo. The next morning, I woke up on the floor, my back sore from falling asleep there, and for a few moments, I forgot where I was. Then my phone buzzed and reality came rushing back. It was another voicemail from my mom. "Caleb, please just come over. We can fix this. Rachel is still here, and she wants to talk to you. This is your chance to make things right." Make things right. The phrase made my stomach turn, as if the responsibility was mine, as if I was the one who had broken something. I didn't call her back. Instead, I dragged myself into the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the counter staring at my phone. I thought about deleting every number in my contacts that had caused me pain this week. My parents, Mason, even Rachel's. I thought about blocking them all, cutting the cord completely. But something in me hesitated. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was fear, but I couldn't quite bring myself to press block. It felt too final, too much like admitting defeat. So I left the phone face down on the counter and forced myself to get through the day. I went to work. I smiled when my coworkers asked how the move was going, and I pretended everything was fine. But when I got home that night, the loneliness was waiting for me. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just hurt because of what someone did, it hurts because of who they are. My dad's voice kept replaying in my head, calm and authoritative, as if his decision to let Rachel move in was logical and justified. My mom's pleas kept echoing, not asking how I was feeling, but begging me to make things right so she wouldn't have to deal with the tension. And then there was Mason, laughing at me like I was the punchline to one of his jokes. I sat in the dark for a long time that night, phone buzzing occasionally with messages I didn't check, until a thought crept into my head that made me sit up straighter. I didn't have to fight them head on. I didn't have to yell, or argue, or prove anything to them. I could simply move on, but do it so fully, so completely, that they would feel the absence of me in a way they couldn't ignore. The thought was both terrifying and liberating. I started making lists, actual lists, written on paper, of everything I needed to do before the move. Close out the lease. Set up utilities in the new apartment. Schedule the movers. Sell or donate furniture I didn't need. It was almost mechanical, the way I threw myself into it. Every time the ache in my chest got too heavy, I would check off another item on the list. It was a small victory, but it reminded me that my life was still moving forward, even if my family didn't approve. I also started going through old photos and letters, deciding what to keep and what to throw away. That was harder than I expected, seeing snapshots of birthdays and holidays, smiling faces around a dinner table where I no longer felt welcome. There was one photo in particular that stopped me cold. A Christmas picture from 2 years ago, me and Rachel sitting on the couch while my parents stood behind us, all of us smiling like we belonged together. I held it in my hands for a long time before quietly slipping it into the trash bag. By the end of that week, my apartment looked emptier than ever, but my head felt clearer. The loneliness was still there, but it was quieter now, replaced by something harder, sharper: resolve. I started thinking about what life would look like once I moved. New city, new job, no ties holding me back. No guilt trips. No unexpected interventions with my ex sitting in my parents' kitchen. The thought was intoxicating. And yet, every time I felt that little spark of excitement, I'd get another text from my mom reminding me that they hadn't given up on me fixing things with Rachel. One night, she even sent me a photo of Rachel cooking dinner in their kitchen, as if that would convince me to come over. That was when I realized my quiet walking away wasn't going to be enough. If I just left without saying anything, they'd tell themselves whatever story made them feel better, that I was being dramatic, that I'd come crawling back eventually, that they had done nothing wrong. No, I needed them to understand. I needed them to see, really see, that their choices had consequences. And so, late one night, I pulled out my notebook again. This time, I didn't write a to-do list. This time, I started mapping out a plan, not just for leaving, but for making sure my family finally took me seriously. I wasn't sure what that plan would look like yet, but I knew one thing. I was done letting them control the narrative. By the time I put the pen down, it was well past midnight. But for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Because now, it wasn't just about surviving the betrayal. It was about what came next. Something shifted in me after that night. I woke up with more energy than I'd felt in weeks, like the act of putting my plan on paper had cleared a fog I didn't realize I'd been living under. I poured myself coffee, sat down with my notebook again, and began refining the plan. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was clarity. A roadmap. The first step was simple: detach completely. I muted the family group chat, unfollowed Rachel on every social platform, and blocked Mason's number after he sent me another mocking meme. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn anyone. I just disappeared from their digital world. At first, the silence was unsettling. No texts buzzing, no calls, no notifications from the group chat lighting up my screen. But then I realized it was peaceful. The extra headspace did something to me. At work, I found myself more focused than ever. Instead of checking my phone every hour or replaying family drama in my head, I threw myself into projects. My boss noticed almost immediately. "Whatever you're doing," he said with a grin during our weekly meeting, "keep it up. You're on fire lately." That comment stuck with me all day. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't Caleb the peacemaker or Caleb the good son. I was just Caleb, a man doing his job well, living his own life. With the promotion officially in motion, HR started walking me through relocation benefits, and I was stunned at how generous they were. They were covering the movers, part of my first month's rent, and even giving me a stipend to furnish my new place. It felt like everything was lining up, like the universe was quietly nudging me forward. In the evenings, I started jogging through the park near my apartment. It wasn't something I'd ever had the habit of doing, but there was something therapeutic about putting on headphones, feeling the cool night air, and just running until my chest burned. Every step felt like I was shedding the weight of the past few months, leaving it behind on the pavement. After a week of that routine, I noticed I was sleeping better, eating better, even smiling more at strangers. But the real turning point came one Saturday morning when I was packing a box of books and found an old leather journal I hadn't opened in years. It was full of notes, ideas, and sketches from when I was fresh out of college. All the dreams I had about starting my own business one day, or writing a book, or traveling the country. I sat there on the floor flipping through those pages and realized something. For the past few years, I'd been living small, playing it safe, saying no to opportunities because they might inconvenience someone else. And here I was, finally saying yes to myself. That afternoon, I drove across town to visit my new apartment for the first time since signing the lease. It was still empty, but standing in that space, imagining where everything would go, I felt a rush of excitement I hadn't felt since I was a kid. I snapped a few photos, the big windows, the view of the city, the balcony where I could picture myself having coffee on quiet mornings, and saved them to my phone. I didn't send them to anyone, not yet, but just having them felt like holding on to a secret victory. Meanwhile, the silence from my family was starting to break. My mom left another voicemail, this time her voice sounding tighter, more worried. "Caleb, honey, we haven't heard from you in days. I wish you'd just talk to us. Rachel's still here. She says she's sorry and just wants to explain. Can't you give her 5 minutes?" But the thing was, for the first time, I didn't want to give them 5 minutes. Every day I kept my distance. I could feel my resolve hardening, my spine straightening. The following week, my boss sent me to the new city for 2 days to meet my future team. It was supposed to be a simple orientation trip, but it ended up being exactly what I needed. The new office was bright, full of energy, and everyone seemed genuinely excited to have me join them. We went out for lunch as a team, laughed over stories, and I couldn't help but notice how refreshing it felt to be around people who only knew me as the new guy with great ideas, not as someone's son or brother or boyfriend. That night, I checked into the hotel, sat on the edge of the bed, and realized I was smiling for no reason. It hit me then. I wasn't just running away from my old life. I was running toward something better. When I flew back home, I hit the ground running, literally and figuratively. I scheduled the movers, finalized my paperwork, and started selling off furniture I didn't need. My evenings were no longer spent scrolling through texts that made my blood boil. Instead, I found myself researching restaurants near my new apartment, parks, bookstores, even local coffee shops I wanted to try out. Every box I packed felt like one more step out of the past. Then something interesting started happening. My absence started to get noticed. One night, I got a text from Mason, not a meme this time, but a short, clipped message. "Mom's worried sick. Call her." I didn't. The next day, my mom left another voicemail. This one sounded different, less pleading, more frantic. "Caleb, your dad is upset. He says he doesn't understand why you're shutting everyone out. Please, just come to dinner Sunday night so we can talk like a family." I listened to the message twice, then set the phone down and smiled to myself. They were starting to feel it, the space I had created. And instead of rushing in to fill that space like I used to, I let it sit there. Let them sit with it. The following weekend, I went back to the new city on my own dime. No work obligations this time, just to get more familiar with the area. I spent 2 days exploring, finding a little diner that served the best pancakes I'd ever had, and even stumbling upon a used bookstore with a reading nook that felt like it had been waiting for me. I posted a photo of the city skyline on my social media. Nothing dramatic, no caption explaining where I was. And within an hour, Mason texted me. "Where are you?" "Mom's freaking out." I didn't reply. It felt good, in a strange way. Not cruel, just freeing. By the end of that trip, I felt like a different person. Stronger, lighter, ready. I went home and circled my move date on the calendar with a red marker. 2 weeks left. And for the first time, I wasn't counting down in dread. I was counting down like it was the best holiday of the year. Because soon, I wouldn't just be walking away. I'd be stepping into something entirely new. And they were going to see just how much better I was without the weight they'd been putting on my shoulders. But just as everything seemed to be falling into place, something happened that forced me to rethink my quiet exit. Because the very next week, I found out just how far my dad was willing to go to fix this situation. And it wasn't just a phone call or a guilt trip this time. It was something much bigger and much harder to forgive. The next week started out like any other. I was in the middle of labeling boxes when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was a telemarketer, but something in me said to pick up. "Hi, is this Caleb Turner?" A polite female voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Karen from Westview Credit Union. I'm calling to confirm an address change request we received for your account ending in 0724. I froze. I didn't bank with Westview. My accounts were with a completely different bank. "I think you have the wrong person," I said. There was a pause. "This is the number we have on file," she said. "The request was submitted yesterday afternoon, and it lists your parents' address as your primary residence. We just need verbal confirmation before we process it." My stomach dropped. I thanked her, asked her to put a hold on the change, and hung up. My dad. He tried to change my mailing address back to their house, probably thinking he could intercept my bank statements, or worse, meddle with my finances in some way to keep tabs on me. The realization hit me like a bucket of cold water. This wasn't just guilt trips and emotional manipulation anymore. They were actively trying to insert themselves into my personal life without my consent. I felt a chill run through me, but underneath it, something else stirred. Not fear. Resolve. I spent the rest of the day on the phone, first with the credit union to make sure nothing had been changed, then with my actual bank to put extra security on my accounts, including a password that only I knew. I even froze my credit temporarily to make sure no one could open anything in my name. By the time I was done, my hands were still shaking, but not just from anger, from a strange kind of excitement. Because now, I had proof. Proof that they had crossed a line so blatantly that even if they tried to spin it later, I could show exactly what happened. That night, I sat down with my notebook and added a new section: leverage. I wrote down everything: the date, the time, the credit union's name, the representative's direct line. If my dad ever tried to claim he was just looking out for me, I could point to this and say, "No, you were trying to control me." But as I wrote, another idea began to take shape. For weeks, my family had been pushing me to come to them, to have one last talk, to sit down and smooth things over on their terms. What if I flipped the script? What if, instead of quietly leaving and letting them rewrite the story, I made sure they knew exactly why I was leaving, and did it in a way that made it impossible for them to twist my words? The thought electrified me. I wasn't talking about yelling or some dramatic confrontation where everyone screamed at each other. That would just give them the chance to call me emotional again and dismiss what I said. No, I was thinking of something colder, smarter, something they couldn't argue with because it wouldn't be a fight, it would be a statement. Over the next few days, I put my plan into motion. Step 1 was writing a letter. Not a rant, not an angry outburst, but a carefully crafted explanation of everything. Why I broke up with Rachel, why I accepted the promotion, and how their decision to side with her and to let her live in their house had shattered my trust. I detailed the address change attempt, too, and how deeply it violated my privacy. I wrote and rewrote that letter until it was perfect, calm, measured, but with no room for misinterpretation. Every sentence was like a brick being laid in a wall, solid and immovable. Step 2 was timing. I decided I wouldn't send it until the day before the movers came. That way, by the time they received it, I'd already be gone. But there was one last step that I couldn't resist. I rented a small storage unit in the new city, not for my stuff. The movers would take care of that, but for something else. A box of mementos from my childhood. Old photos, school awards, letters my mom had written me when I was a kid. Things I'd kept because they reminded me of better times. I wasn't throwing them away, not yet, but I was leaving them behind, literally and figuratively. They didn't get to hold that part of me hostage anymore. Meanwhile, I started noticing subtle shifts from my family. Mason sent me another text, but this time it wasn't mocking. "You're really not coming to dinner Sunday," he wrote. "Mom's been crying all week. Dad's acting like you joined a cult or something." I stared at the message for a long time before typing a short reply. "No, I told you I'm moving." He didn't respond. 2 days later, I got a message from Rachel herself. "Caleb, I'm moving out of your parents' house," it read. "This whole thing has gotten way too tense. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." For a moment, I almost felt a pang of sympathy. Almost. But then I remembered the smirk on her face when I came to get my stuff. The way she told me I'd never have a real relationship if I couldn't learn to forgive. I didn't reply. Instead, I added one last paragraph to my letter. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I love you, but I will no longer be the one holding this family together at the cost of my own self-respect. If you want to have a relationship with me in the future, it will be on the basis of mutual respect, not guilt, not control, and not manipulation. I sealed it in an envelope and placed it on my counter, ready to be mailed on moving day. And then, as if the universe wanted to test my resolve one last time, my dad called again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Caleb," he said, sounding strangely calm. "I heard you're moving next week. If you walk out that door, don't expect us to be waiting when you come back." For a split second, the old me, the people pleaser, wanted to panic, to beg, to try to fix things. But instead, I felt something else. A strange, quiet power. Because this time, I had the upper hand. And I wasn't about to waste it. Moving day arrived sooner than I expected, but by then, I was ready. Not just logistically, but emotionally. The movers came early in the morning, and I supervised while they carried out the last of my furniture. Every piece that left the apartment felt like a burden being lifted. By noon, the space was completely empty, and all that remained was the echo of my own footsteps. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment, taking it all in. This was where I'd spent late nights wondering if I was making a mistake, where I'd first gotten the call from my dad, where I'd sat on the floor with a hollow chest feeling like I'd lost everything. But I wasn't that person anymore. I grabbed the envelope with my letter, the one I had spent days perfecting, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Then I got in my car and drove, not to the post office like I originally planned, but to my parents' house. If this was going to be my last act before leaving, I wanted to do it face to face. The driveway was crowded when I arrived. My parents' cars, Mason's truck. Of course, it was Sunday. The whole family was here. My stomach tightened, but instead of fear, I felt a kind of calm clarity. When I rang the doorbell, my mom answered. Her expression went from surprise to relief in an instant. "Caleb," she said, reaching for my arm. "I'm so glad you." "I'm not staying," I said gently, stepping past her. The living room was just like I remembered it. Neat, comfortable, filled with the smell of my mom's cooking. Dad was sitting in his recliner, Mason on the couch, both looking up as I entered. "Caleb," Dad said, his tone already edged with disapproval. "You finally decided to come to your senses?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled the envelope from my jacket and placed it on the coffee table. "What's this?" Mason asked, frowning. "A letter," I said. "Everything I have to say is in there." Dad leaned forward, scowling. "If you have something to say it to our faces. Don't be a coward." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a strange sense of detachment. This was the man I had spent years trying to please, bending over backward to earn his approval. And right then, I realized I didn't need it anymore. "I already did," I said quietly. "You just didn't listen." Mom looked stricken. "Caleb, please. I'm moving today," I continued, keeping my voice steady. "Across the country. I won't be back for a long time. Maybe ever. You can read the letter after I'm gone, and then you can decide how you want to move forward." Mason scoffed. "This is so dramatic, dude. You're running away over a girl." I turned to him, calm as ever. "This isn't about Rachel anymore. This is about the fact that my feelings have never been taken seriously in this family. This is about you all inviting my ex into your house without a second thought, siding with her over me, and even trying to change my bank address so you could keep tabs on me." That made Dad shift uncomfortably. "Good. He hadn't expected me to know about that." "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, but his voice was just a little too defensive. "I do," I replied evenly. "The credit union called me. I have their report with the date and time of the request. You crossed a line, Dad. And that's why I'm done." The room was dead silent. For a moment, no one spoke. My mom's eyes were shiny with tears, Mason's jaw was tight, and my dad looked like he'd just been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I just stood there, perfectly calm, and let them sit in the weight of it. Then I turned toward the door. "Caleb, wait," Mom said, stepping forward. "Please, if you go now." "I am going," I said softly, but with finality. "You can call me when you're ready to treat me like someone whose voice matters. Until then, I have nothing more to say." I walked out without another word. Outside, the air felt crisp and cool, like a reset button had just been pressed. I got into my car, drove to the nearest mailbox, and dropped a second copy of the letter inside just to make sure they couldn't ignore it later. And then I drove away, not just from their house, but from the entire city. It was a long drive to the new place, hours of open road ahead of me. But for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. I wasn't running anymore. I was free. When I arrived at my new apartment late that night, I set my phone on the counter and left it there without checking it. Whatever voicemails or texts were waiting could stay there until morning. Instead, I opened the blinds, stepped out onto the balcony, and just stood there looking out over the city lights. And I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally chosen myself. The real revenge wasn't yelling or slamming doors or proving them wrong. It was standing in that quiet apartment, hundreds of miles away, living a life that was entirely mine, and knowing that they were going to have to sit with the knowledge that they pushed me to this point. And something told me they weren't going to like that feeling one bit. Because the next morning, when I finally checked my phone, I saw exactly what I expected. Missed calls, dozens of them, and one message from my dad, short and clipped. "We need to talk." I put the phone down and smiled to myself. They were feeling it now, the space, the silence, the consequence of their choices. And I wasn't done yet, because I had one more step planned, one final, undeniable way to make sure they never forgot what happened here. The morning after the move felt different, almost unnervingly quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when everything has been torn apart but the air is finally clear. I brewed coffee in my new kitchen, still half full of unpacked boxes, and opened my phone. The notifications were endless: calls, texts, even voicemails. For a moment, I considered deleting them all and starting fresh. But then I pressed play on the first voicemail. It was my mom. Her voice was shaky. "Caleb, we read your letter. I didn't realize how hurt you were. I thought we were helping. I just wanted to keep the family together, but maybe I made things worse. Please call me." The next voicemail was from Dad, and it sounded nothing like the man who had lectured me over the phone just a week ago. His voice was lower, slower. "I didn't mean to violate your trust, son. I thought I was protecting you, but I can see now that I overstepped. I should have let you handle things your own way. If you ever want to talk, my door's open." There was one from Mason, too, though his was more blunt. "Okay, fine. You win. Mom's been crying for days and Dad's been in a mood. You got what you wanted. Hope you're happy." I wasn't happy, not exactly, but I wasn't sad either. I listened to the rest of the voicemails, most of them variations of apologies, attempts to justify their actions, and awkward admissions that they'd made mistakes. And as I sat there sipping coffee, I realized something important. This was the first time in my life that my family wasn't brushing my feelings aside. They weren't telling me to calm down. They weren't telling me to compromise. They were finally sitting with the fact that I wasn't coming back, not unless they learned how to respect me. Later that week, I got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a stack of old family photos, neatly bundled together with a note on top in my mom's handwriting. "We thought you'd want these for your new place." I sat there holding the bundle, staring at the familiar faces smiling back at me. This time, though, the photos didn't sting the way they had before. Instead, they felt like a choice, something I could keep, not something I was chained to. I put them in a small box and slid it onto a shelf. Not front and center, but not hidden either. Just there. 2 weeks later, my mom called again. This time not to beg, but just to ask how I was doing. The conversation was short, polite, almost cautious. It felt like a new chapter, one where we might actually build something healthy instead of replaying the same old pattern. But the most surprising moment came a month later, when Mason called me out of the blue. "Hey," he said, his tone more serious than usual. "I've been thinking about what you said. About respect. Maybe I haven't been the best brother." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Mason had never apologized for anything in his life, at least not to me. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. He hesitated, then said, "Mom and Dad are different lately. Less, I don't know, controlling. I think you scared them straight." I chuckled softly. "I didn't scare them. I just finally told them where the line was." We didn't talk long, but when I hung up, I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift off my shoulders. The family dinners I used to dread eventually started up again, just without Rachel at the table. She had apparently moved out of state herself, and whatever story she told about what happened between us didn't matter anymore. Because I had my own story now. And it ended here, on a cool evening a few months later, when I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sun sink behind the city skyline. The world felt wide open, full of possibilities. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and sent one final message to the family group chat, the first I'd sent in months. "Dinner's on me next time I'm in town. My treat. We can catch up, if you're ready." A minute later, my mom sent a heart emoji. I smiled, set the phone down, and leaned on the balcony railing, feeling the warm wind on my face. This wasn't the ending where everything was magically fixed. This was better because it was real. I had walked away, I had set my boundaries, and I had proven to myself, and to them, that I could build a life that was mine. And as I stood there watching the city lights flicker to life, I said it out loud, just for myself. I'm finally free. And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it.